My son looked me in the eye and said, "You should be grateful we still talk to you." So I smiled, went silent, and started moving the family business into my name alone. Grant said it at the Christmas party like he was offering me mercy. 39 years old. MBA from Vanderbilt. Standing in the atrium of a company whose payroll I had carried through recessions, machine failures, late invoices, and weeks where the bank balance looked like a dare. He put one hand on my shoulder in front of employees who had eaten because Whitaker Label and Packaging stayed alive. Then he smiled. "You know, Dad, most fathers your age would be pushed out completely. You should be grateful we still talk to you." I smiled back. I nodded. Then I went quiet. Completely quiet. Because I had known something Grant did not know for 4 months. I knew what was in the folder inside Judith Klein's briefcase. I knew what was scheduled for February 18th. And I knew exactly how a man ends a coup without raising his voice. My name is Arthur Whitaker. I am 68 years old, and I built Whitaker Label and Packaging from a rented warehouse on Parker Mill Road with one used Komori offset press that jammed whenever the humidity climbed and a smell of hot oil, paper dust, and ink that lived in my throat for the first 3 years. That was 1985. Eileen was the one people remembered. My wife could walk into a client meeting with a sample book under one arm and make a nervous purchasing manager feel like he was getting in early on something inevitable. She had warmth. Timing. A laugh that made people lean forward. She sold belief before we had earned enough proof to make belief reasonable. What Eileen could not do was rebuild a payroll system after our first accountant disappeared with 6 months of withholding records. What she could not do was talk a paper supplier into net 60 terms when we were too small to deserve them. What she could not do was sit across from 4 banks, get told no 3 times, and still walk into the 4th with clean numbers and a straighter back. That was me. P&L statements. Vendor calls. Tax filings. Loan applications. Insurance claims after the binding room flooded in 1992 and cost us $98,000 we did not have. The systems. The dull, unromantic machinery that keeps a company alive after the vision has gone home for the night. Eileen used to say it at company dinners. Arthur is the reason this place opens on Monday. Grant and Mara were at those dinners. They heard the words. I don't think they ever understood them. Eileen died in 2006. Stroke. 57 years old. One minute she was standing in our kitchen reading a vendor quote over my shoulder, and the next, she was gone before the ambulance reached Greenville Memorial. I did not fall apart. Not because I was strong. Because I did not have room. Grant and Mara were in their 20s. 92 employees needed paychecks. We had $5.1 million in outstanding receivables and 3 major clients waiting on delivery. On the 5th day after the funeral, I went back to the office. I sat at Eileen's desk. Our desk, really. And I kept the company breathing. Grant came home 3 weeks after Eileen's funeral. He had an MBA from Vanderbilt, 2 new suits, and the certainty of a man who had spent graduate school being told leadership was a language you could learn without touching the machinery underneath it. He wanted the vice president title. His own office. A company SUV. He said, and I remember this exactly, Mom would have wanted me running this by now. I made him start in client relations. He looked at me like I had slapped him. That's entry-level work. No, I said, that is where people learn whether promises we make in conference rooms can survive a production floor. He used words like trust, legacy, my own family's company. That last one stayed with me. Not your company, Dad. Not ours. My family's. I told him, you will understand this business from the ground up, or you will not understand it at all. He stayed. And for a while, I thought he was learning. Mara joined 2 years later. She had worked in brand strategy in Charlotte and came home with sharp ideas, sharper clothes, and the kind of vocabulary people use when they want old rooms to feel embarrassed for still existing. She wanted to run marketing. Immediately. I gave her a senior role under Dana Holt, who had been with us since 1998 and knew more about retail packaging clients than most consultants learn in a decade. Mara called it condescending. Then controlling. Then, in a meeting with 3 department heads present, she said I had never learned how to let anyone else lead because I needed every decision to pass through my hands. I let it go. I told myself fathers make room. So I kept making room. I did not understand yet that my children did not want room. They wanted me gone. It started in 2020. Small at first. That is how people take control when they do not want you to notice the door closing. On a Tuesday morning in February, I walked into the weekly operations review and saw a slide deck on the screen I had not approved. Not revised. Replaced. 3 supplier contracts had been restructured. 2 new vendor relationships were listed as active. A pricing adjustment for a medical supply label client had already been marked implemented. Grant saw my face. We made a few updates overnight, he said smoothly. Nothing major. Just streamlining. Streamlining. That word became a broom for everything they did not want explained. In March, I found myself missing from a client email chain around message 12. I had been on the first 11. Then somewhere in the middle, my name vanished. When I asked Mara about it, she gave me that flat corporate smile people use when they are pretending confusion is kindness. You probably missed the notification, Dad. In April, Luis Garza stopped coming to me with production questions. Luis had been with us 21 years. He had once driven in at 1:30 in the morning to help me keep a food packaging run alive after a feeder belt split clean through. He did not avoid me easily. So when he started sending decisions above a certain dollar threshold to Grant's office, I asked him directly. Luis looked at the floor. I was told that was the new routing. By who? He swallowed. Grant's assistant. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water I never drank. I said it out loud once, just to hear whether it sounded paranoid. Something is happening. It did not sound paranoid. It sounded late. The staff changes confirmed it. Grant hired 3 new people in 6 months. All of them reported to him. None of them had real packaging or commercial print experience. 2 came from restructuring consulting, which is one of those phrases that sounds clean until you have run a company long enough to know what it usually leaves behind. Then Marta Wynn came into my office one afternoon. Marta had been my assistant for 12 years. She knew how I took coffee, which vendors lied about delivery windows, and when a room had changed temperature before anyone opened their mouth. She closed the door. Arthur, she said quietly, are you stepping back? I looked up. No. Her face changed. People have been told you are. Not officially. Just enough that they've started saying it like it's already decided. I thanked her. She left. I sat there alone and understood something colder than suspicion. They were not planning around me anymore. They were planning my absence. The document was buried in the 3rd folder of a stack Grant handed me in late October. Just routine governance updates, he said. Legal wants everything current. He said it while checking his watch. A flight to Nashville. A client dinner. a deadline that made the whole stack feel like housekeeping instead of a weapon. I have been signing contracts for almost 40 years. I do not sign blind. I read. But that is the thing about traps built by people who know your habits. They do not always hide the knife. Sometimes they label it continuity. It took me 40 minutes that night to find the clause. The language sounded responsible at first. Succession planning. Operational stability. Leadership continuity. Then I reached the trigger conditions. If the majority owner voluntarily stepped down from operational management or was determined by a qualified medical professional to be unable to fulfill executive duties, operational authority would transfer according to the minority succession structure. Grant. Mara. The next generation. My signature was already on page 11. Governance Amendment 7. I set the folder down on my kitchen table. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I read the clause again. Then a third time. Not because I misunderstood it. Because I understood it perfectly. My children had not asked me to retire. They had built a door and were looking for a doctor to help them push me through it. Then I went to the shared drive. Not that night. Not immediately. I waited until the next morning because anger is useful only after it has cooled enough to hold a pen. I still had admin access to the company server. Of course I did. I had approved the first internal system in 2011, paid for the 2016 upgrade, and sat through 2 miserable weekends with IT when the migration corrupted half our archived vendor files. I was not hacking anything. I was walking through a building I had built. It took me 43 minutes to find the folder. Operations Review. Boring name. Safe name. The kind of name designed to disappear in a list. Inside were 43 emails spanning 8 months. Grant to Mara, March 6th. We need to accelerate the timeline. Q3 gives us cover. Frame it as honoring Dad's legacy. People respond well to that. Mara to Grant, March 9th. Start documenting inconsistencies. Build a paper trail before he resists. I've already spoken to HR about his behavior in the February vendor meeting. Then one line that made the room narrow around me. Could salary reduction create leverage? I sat very still. There are betrayals that hurt because they are loud. This one hurt because it had bullet points. Then I opened Grant's email to an external consultant named Harlan Price. Business Transition Specialist. Charlotte. Grant had written, I believe my father may be showing early cognitive decline. We have noticed confusion, repetition, and resistance to necessary modernization. We may need professional documentation for legal purposes. Cognitive decline. I read those 2 words 4 times. I was 66 when he wrote that. Still reviewing vendor terms. Still catching invoice errors. Still remembering die-cut specs for clients Grant had only met twice. My son was not worried about my mind. He was trying to turn my age into a crowbar. I printed everything. Every email. Every attachment. Every timestamp. Then I put the pages in chronological order on my kitchen table. I did not call Grant. I did not call Mara. Fathers are trained to confuse explanation with repair. I was done explaining. The first call I made was to Judith Klein. Judith was a corporate attorney in Atlanta with 32 years in business law and a professional habit of not being surprised by anything. We had used her firm for 3 major transactions before. I trusted her because she did not comfort people before she understood the documents. I called at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. I need to come in, I said. I have paperwork. I need to know what my options are. She said, Thursday at 2. I brought everything. Governance Amendment 7. The Operations Review emails. The Harlan Price correspondence. The HR notes Mara had started building about my so-called behavior. I laid the folders on Judith's conference table and sat across from her while she read. Judith did not move quickly. She moved correctly. Page by page. Tab by tab. Once, she wrote something on a yellow pad. When she reached Grant's email about cognitive decline, her jaw tightened. That was the closest thing to outrage I had ever seen on her face. She looked up. Tell me the ownership structure. 60% mine, I said. 20% Grant. 20% Mara. Original agreement. 1999. Still active? Yes. She sat back slightly. Not smiling. But close enough. Arthur, she said, your children spent 8 months building a trap. I waited. They forgot to check who owns the ground underneath it. Judith pulled one document from the bottom of the stack. The 1999 buy-sell agreement. Eileen and I had signed it when succession was still a distant, responsible word instead of a weapon my children would use. Judith tapped Section 4. As majority owner, she said, you have the right to purchase minority shares at fair market value. Grant and Mara had built a trap. They forgot the foundation. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and check the Spotify link in the description below. These quiet verdicts take time to build, but the ending is always worth staying for. Judith referred me to Samuel Reed. 24 years in business valuation. Manufacturing acquisitions. Commercial print groups. Companies where the machines mattered as much as the revenue. Samuel arrived the next Thursday with 2 associates, 3 laptops, and the expression of a man who did not care about family stories until they showed up in the numbers. For 3 days, his team reviewed everything. Receivables. Equipment value. Client contracts. Debt. Margins. Growth history. The number came back at 18.4 million. Grant's 20% was worth 3.68. Mara's 20% was worth 3.68. Fair market value. Clean. Defensible. Exactly what I needed. The loan came from Piedmont Commercial Bank. Same bank that had extended our first real credit line when Eileen and I still kept invoices in cardboard boxes. Calvin Mercer, Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending, called me himself after reviewing the application. Arthur, he said, this is the cleanest commercial approval I've seen all quarter. Nearly 40 years of audited statements. No missed payments. No tax problems. No creative bookkeeping. $7.36 million secured against the company. I signed the loan documents on December 6th. Then I waited. The Christmas party was held in the atrium of our main facility. Eileen had started that tradition in 1990 with a folding table, a grocery store cake, and 12 employees standing around a press that still leaked oil. By that December, it was catered. Open bar. String lights across the mezzanine. 92 people in good clothes, laughing under a company logo my wife had once sketched on a napkin. I dressed carefully. Dark suit. White shirt. The old watch Eileen gave me on our 25th anniversary. I was not performing weakness. I was letting Grant believe I was. He found me near the bar at 7:45. Relaxed. Almost kind. The way a man acts when he thinks the hard part is finished and all that remains is managing the old man's feelings. He put a hand on my shoulder. In front of supervisors, press operators, office staff, people whose mortgages had survived because this company survived. You know, Dad, he said, smiling, most fathers your age would be pushed out completely. You should be grateful we still talk to you. For 1 second, I saw him at 8 years old, asleep under my desk during a snowstorm because Eileen and I were both working late. Then I saw him as he was. I smiled. You're probably right, I said. And I walked away to refill my water. February 18th arrived on a Tuesday. Grant had scheduled the board meeting 6 months earlier. Strategic Transition Planning. That was the title on the calendar invitation. Clean. Professional. Empty enough to hide a blade. He had invited 3 external advisors without asking me. Mara, himself, me, as if allowing the founder into his own company's future was a courtesy. I arrived 12 minutes early. Judith Klein was already in the parking lot, standing beside her car with a leather portfolio under one arm. Her associate, Miles Okafor, stood next to her with a banker's box organized in numbered tabs. No drama. No raised voices. Just paper. We walked in together. The conference room smelled like coffee, dry markers, and new authority. Grant had set himself halfway down the long side of the table, laptop open, projector ready, small remote in his right hand. I took the chair at the head. The real head. The one Eileen and I had used for 30 years. Grant looked up. For 1 second, his face slipped. Then he smiled. Dad, he said warmly, glad you're here. I folded my hands on the table. Go ahead. Grant went through his slides. I will give him this. He had prepared well. Clean graphics. Projected revenue. A 5-year growth plan. New vendor strategy. Digital ordering platform. A timeline with milestones written in confident blue font, the kind consultants use when they want uncertainty to look like weather already forecasted. The title slide read, Whitaker Label and Packaging, the Next Generation. He talked about innovation, modernization, market expansion, operational efficiency. Then, twice, he used the phrase honoring Dad's legacy. The first time, Mara looked at her phone. The second time, she looked at Grant. Not once did she look at me. The 3 external advisors nodded along as if they had been invited to witness a responsible transition instead of a family attempting to move a living man into a display case. Grant reached the final slide. My name appeared under a heading that said Advisory Board, Non-Operational. Arthur Whitaker. Founder. Legacy Consultant. I stared at the words. Legacy Consultant. I had signed the first lease. Secured the first loan. Made the first payroll. Buried my wife and came back on the 5th day to keep the doors open. Grant took a breath. Dad, he said, using his serious client voice, you built something incredible. Nobody is taking that from you. He spread his hands. You've earned the rest. I let the silence sit for 5 seconds. Then I turned to Judith. I believe you have documents to distribute. Miles Okafor opened the banker's box. 5 folders. 1 for Grant. 1 for Mara. 1 for each external advisor Grant had invited to make my removal look professional. The room filled with paper sounds. Folders opening. Pages turning. Breathing changing. Grant read the first page too quickly, then slowed down, then stopped. Mara made a small sound in her throat. Judith's voice stayed level. Arthur Whitaker, as 60% majority owner of Whitaker Label and Packaging, is exercising his rights under the 1999 buy-sell agreement to purchase all outstanding minority shares at fair market value. Grant looked up. No color in his face now. Judith continued. Independent valuation by Samuel Reed places the company at $18.4 million. Your 20% interest is valued at $3.68 million each. The funds are secured through Piedmont Commercial Bank and available for transfer upon execution. One advisor flipped to the funding letter. Another found the valuation summary. The third stopped pretending he understood what Grant had told him before the meeting. You have 30 days to accept or decline, Judith said. After that, the agreement's default provisions activate. Grant stared at the folder like it had betrayed him. But paper does not betray anyone. It only remembers. Grant pushed his chair back hard enough that the wheels struck the wall behind him. You can't be serious. Judith did not blink. Completely serious. This is our company, he said. There it was. Not the legal argument. The real one. Mara looked up then, eyes bright and furious. This is our inheritance. I turned toward her. No, I said. It was a gift. Her mouth tightened. You're doing this to punish us. Grant was still standing, one hand flat on the table, breathing like a man trying not to look frantic in front of people he had brought there to admire him. You can't just take it back, he said. I can purchase it, I said, at fair market value, under the agreement your mother and I signed before either of you owned a share. He shook his head. You're stealing from your own children. I looked at my son. Grant, I said quietly, sit down. He did not. But everyone heard the room change. I want to read something, I said. Grant finally looked at me then. Not angry anymore. Worried. That was the first honest expression he had worn all morning. I opened my folder and pulled out the printed email. Grant Whitaker to Harlan Price, I said, March 6th. The three external advisors went very still. Grant's mouth opened. I read before he could speak. I believe my father may be showing early cognitive decline. We have noticed confusion, repetition, and resistance to necessary modernization. We may need professional documentation for legal purposes. The room did not move. I set that page down and picked up the next one. Mara to Grant. March 9th. Mara stared at the table. Start documenting inconsistencies. Build a paper trail before he resists. I've already spoken to HR about his behavior in the February vendor meeting. Could salary reduction create leverage? I looked at the advisors. For context, I said, the February vendor meeting was the one where I caught a $43,000 billing error before it went to payment. No one asked for clarification. They understood enough. Grant said, Dad. No. One word. Quiet. Final. You do not get to call me Dad in the middle of a record you built to prove I was losing my mind. His face collapsed for half a second. Then he looked away. Judith spoke before Grant could recover enough to perform concern. I also want the record to reflect, she said, that Governance Amendment 7 has been reviewed by independent counsel. Mara's eyes lifted. Judith turned one page. The amendment was presented to Mr. Whitaker as routine governance paperwork without clear material disclosure of the trigger provisions that would remove operational authority from the majority owner. She looked at the advisors, not my children. That mattered. Independent counsel found the presentation problematic. That review is included as Exhibit G in your folders. Pages moved at once. All three advisors turned to Exhibit G. Grant did not. He kept staring at me like I had changed the rules. But I had not changed them. That was the part he could not understand. I had simply read the old ones better than he had read the new ones. Judith closed her folder halfway. Any attempt to enforce that amendment under these circumstances would create significant exposure. The room absorbed the sentence. Exposure. Not betrayal. Not heartbreak. The word that business people understand when shame is not enough. One of Grant's external advisors cleared his throat. Fletcher. Restructuring background. The kind of man Grant had introduced to me in September as one of the smartest transition minds in the Southeast. Mr. Whitaker, he said carefully, has this been reviewed independently? Judith answered before I did. By my firm, yes. 32 years in corporate law. By Samuel Reed, 24 years in business valuation. By Piedmont Commercial Bank, which reviewed the full financial history and secured the buyout funding. Would you like contact information for any of those parties? Fletcher glanced at Grant. Then back at Judith. No, he said. Grant finally understood. The people he had brought to protect his plan were now protecting themselves. Grant and Mara accepted the buyout on day 26. Not because they suddenly understood. Not because regret had done what evidence could not. They accepted because their own attorneys told them the same thing Judith had already put in writing. The 1999 agreement was valid. The valuation was defensible. The funding was secured. And if they tried to fight by leaning on Governance Amendment 7, they would have to explain why routine paperwork contained a clause designed to remove their father through medical incompetence. Grant called me on a Thursday evening. No hello. We're taking the offer. I was in my office, looking at a production report Louise had left on my desk. Okay, I said. A long silence followed. Then Grant said, I want you to know we thought we were doing what was right for the company. I thought about Harlan Price. About cognitive decline. About salary reduction as leverage. About Christmas lights in the atrium and my son's hand on my shoulder. I know you did, I said. Then I hung up. What happened after that was quieter. That is usually how real endings behave. Whitaker Label and Packaging is 100% mine now. I restructured management, not out of revenge, but because the company needed clean lines again. I hired an operations director named Renata Solis, who came from a packaging group in Nashville and understood process without treating people like replaceable parts. Louise stayed in production. Marta stayed with me, and I gave her the raise she should have had 2 years earlier. Harlan Price lost 2 clients in the next 6 months after people in the regional business community heard enough to become careful around him. That did not come from me. Judith Klein has a professional network, and professional networks talk. I saw Grant in June at my granddaughter's birthday party. She turned 7. She ran to me when I walked through the door, and I held her in the entryway while pink balloons bumped against the ceiling. Over her shoulder, I saw Grant standing in the kitchen. He looked older than he had in February. I probably did too. We nodded at each other. That was all. Mara sends holiday texts. Nothing more. I do not know if that will change. I still love my children. That is the inconvenient truth people forget about betrayal. Love does not vanish just because trust is destroyed. But trust, once used as a structural weakness to exploit, does not simply grow back because everyone is tired of the damage. I built the company to survive. Now I am learning whether I can do the same.